In the end, what does it all mean? Have you lived well? All the thoughts thought, all the people you loved, fought, and laughed with? Or was it about what you earned and bought? Here, in the godless best of the West, what does it all mean?
I know when I was what I thought was on my deathbed 20 years ago, 21 years ago, I wasn't lying there thinking, gosh, I've lived in some lovely houses, I've driven some wonderful cars. It was more about, am I at peace with myself? Do I know myself? Am I at peace with my history? Do the people that love me know who I am? It's never about the stuff.
I think in Australia at the moment we do have an epidemic of meaninglessness. Feeling that all the old values that used to be so important seem to have been eroded and lost. And on the one hand, many people feel that that's a liberation to get rid of those old Christian values that I grew up with. But now we're aware of the emptiness that it's left us in as a culture.
Northeast of Perth, nestled in a languid vale, is an old monastery where Benedictine monks go about their days in quiet contemplation of a God that is increasingly unfamiliar to many Australians.
Originally, Christianity was an Eastern religion. It was a Middle Eastern religion at any rate. It took a long time to get coverage throughout the West. When you look at the migration patterns of the 20th century, I think it's a bit unfair to say that Australia is a Christian country, because I think Muslims should be as welcome in Australia as Christians and Buddhists, Hindus. So I tend to be a bit more wary of identifying Christianity with the West.
In the 6th century, Benedict became disillusioned with the world and chose to live as a hermit in a cave near Rome. He developed and wrote about a disciplined life dedicated to prayer for people seeking God in a community.
All you nations, sing out your joy to the Lord.
For more than 150 years, this monastery supported as many as 70 monks. Today, there are just 11.
The reason that St. Benedict gives for keeping silence in the monastery is that monks should be listening people, they should be learning people, and not holding forth and trying to teach everybody all the time. There's a receptivity, a passivity even, about our life, that we believe that God is giving himself all the time, and our problem is that we don't listen to that, we don't observe it, we don't take space, time away to see what's actually happening around us.
Well, we can't, because what's happening around us, as we've seen through this series, is a time-poor Western world offering economic enslavement, moral decay, and cultural confusion. We live in a permissive but increasingly shallow society, pursuing mammon and cut-glass heroes. We revel in other people's outrage and scandal while aspiring to gloss and spectacle. Like ancient Rome, we fiddle with excess while knowingly contributing to our own demise. And to fill a spiritual vacuum, we reach for meaning in drugs, therapy, and shopping centres. But since when has happiness or even fulfilment depended on consumption?
If you look at the 7 deadly sins and cardinal virtues, for example, the virtues are things like faith, hope, charity, prudence, temperance or moderation, religion, and fortitude, courage or strength. The vices are typically pride in the sense of vanity or self-centeredness, envy, avarice or greed, gluttony, wrath or anger, sloth or laziness. By their nature, individualism and materialism have tended to, in fact, reverse that list and place a lot of emphasis on the individual satisfying their desires and needs. And what we see out of that is this cascade of personal and social consequences that are really harmful to both the individual and society.
And religion, which guided our morals and virtues. But 600 years ago, the state and church used each other to further their empires. The seeds of our decadence were contained in that era. God was used to justify the getting of wealth and power. Politics and religion shared the same bed, and neither have been the same ever since.
Nevertheless, Christianity was the bedrock of expansionist Western civilization until recently. Materialism's final victim is Christianity.
Time magazine declared God was dead.
Yes, that's right. And rightly so. Very interesting. That moment, I think it was 67. Yes, the 60s were a crucial decade. In a sense, they'd been coming a long while. Christianity had become a religion which was mainly reduced to ethics. And there was a great deal of conventional church going and that sort of thing. The 60s shook the whole thing out and really made people choose between being conventional Christians or being unbelievers. The fallout in the West was immense. And from that time onwards, Christianity has been a minority religion in the West.
Well, it all depends how you define it. His type of Christianity certainly is. But 70% of Australians call themselves Christians still.
Yes, alive and well in all its sectarian divisions. There's grim disillusionment with God's offices and their high sacred vows. Poverty, chastity and obedience have descended into a muddy scrum of wealth, sex and power.
Well, in recent years, when confronted with allegations about the sexual abuse of children and other vulnerable people by the clergy, what did the churches do? They privileged the law over love, property over people. They privileged protecting their back over facing the truth. And in doing so, they caused great cynicism, which eats away at the bonds of an institution, and it has begun to topple.
Reclaiming its once exclusive flock is a challenge for the mainstream church.
But for some denominations, a glossy makeover is packing them in the aisles.
If you can see who you are today in Christ, you've got a foundation to live the life that God intends for you to live.
Hillsong's a contemporary charismatic church. I don't really know what the statistics are and how many have come from other established churches, traditional churches. I think that what people connect with is a sense of direction, that they're not just being confronted with form and men's traditions as opposed to Bible tradition and so on. They're singing in a way that they can communicate with, that the Bible's being taught in a way that is touching the real practical issues in their life. And I feel like young people are drawn to that. Plus, of course, the idea of friendship and relationship and community that comes with being part of a church.
For this congregation, God is definitely back, with friends in high places.
I think it's a remarkable testament, can I say, that at 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening in a suburb of Sydney, you can gather a congregation such as this. Pretty impressive.
But if the mainstream churches are wondering why their congregations have gone AWOL, are these happy clappers also oblivious to the humbler origins of Christianity?
Their faith that they are presenting is very simplistic and black and white and based on a very intense and narrow form of personal morality that in fact doesn't deal properly with the complexity of life, then people are often going to be in a far worse state when they leave those churches, which they will, than they were when they came.
But where will they go?
So yeah, beforehand I was just pretty much, I don't know about a normal teenager, I guess. Yeah, was just into music and parties and sort of, yeah, looking for girls sort of thing. But every now and again it would just come to my mind, oh, maybe I should search for some spirituality, some religion or something. So one day, okay, well I've got the internet, so how about Buddhism? I'll see what that's all about. And so I typed it in, and that's how I found it.
While a Google search might yield some pointers, the fact is these Eastern religions, or more accurately, ways of life, have evolved in faraway cultures over thousands of years. A mountain meditation course, a weekly stint at yoga, or even a couple of years of monasticism isn't going to fill the vacuum of a self-indulgent life in a material world. So, get off my cloud.
Buddhism talks much more about finding happiness than about finding God, I think, and this seems to resonate with both the kind of materialistic search for happiness and pleasure, and somehow linking that in to happiness in a much deeper spiritual sense as well.
So now we look for religions to justify our consumption of the meaningless. But ask any of our leaders and they'll tell you there's only one. Salvation is to be found in economic growth. When you've got lots of stuff and pots of money, who needs anything else? Especially an intangible spirituality, which is quite different to religion.
I think a culture without spirituality is in real danger of not understanding the inner life, seeing only what's superficial. And I think you can see how our society, Western culture in particular, I'm talking about this country, is losing touch with the reality of its past, particularly when it comes to issues like death and danger and tragedy. You look at the ways that we now try to commemorate people who die sudden death along the roadways. People don't know how to cope with the tragedy of death and sudden death and tragedy in a way that if you look at ancient cemeteries, if you go back to the cemeteries from the 19th century dotted around Australia and you look at the memorials on the tombstones of families who lost babies and young children, they are full of the same grief and tragedy, but with a sense of hope and belief in the afterlife, in resurrection, in the continuing reality of that person's life in some other way. That, I believe, gave people once upon a time some hope and some solace. People today don't have that. They don't know the story of their culture's past.
There's an old word, acedia. It means spiritual torpor, an absence of zeal for divine things. Former American politician William Bennett says acedia brings with it a sadness, a sorrow of the world. The slothful man hates the spiritual. He wants to be free of its demands. The old theologians taught that acedia arises from a heart steeped in the worldly and carnal, and from a low esteem of divine things. It eventually leads to a hatred of the good altogether. Spiritual acedia is not a new condition, of course, but today it is in ascendance, helped along by an aggressive secularity.
In the 1900s, people talked about secular education. They didn't mean God-free education, they meant education for this world. And secular has now come to mean anti-God.
We're not animals, and we don't want our society to be ruled by the law of the jungle, where the strong take what they can and the poor and the weak give what they have to. And because I think nearly everyone, certainly in Australia, recognises that truth and justice and compassion, these are spiritual values, not to mention faith, that these are important for good communities.
Where is their hope? Back within the hushed cloisters of the Benedictine monastery, there is purity of thought and spirit to be found.
I'm more interested in Christians than in Christianity, I suppose, and I'm more interested in God than in the structures of religion and the Christian churches and so on. So from one point of view, I don't particularly mind if Christianity as a system dies out, but I believe that there's enough wisdom and enough spiritual gold to be mined in the Christian tradition that there will always be Christians around.
And the mining continues, but not in the traditional sites. Café Church, along with pub and surfing church, are part of emerging pockets of deinstitutionalised churches, where groups of mostly disillusioned young people are gathering, away from the big house on the hill, to recover old, essential Christianity.
In the beginning, God created the heavens
without the
and
noise of charismatic churches, nor the hidebound ceremony of high church.
The church actually started with 12 blokes on a beach having a barbie. That really was what it was about. Jesus raised from the dead, walked down the beach, cooked some fish and said, okay, guys, this is what's going to happen. Now, how we got from 12 guys having a barbie on the beach to, this massive Vatican thing with, all the world's great art treasures the way that we do it is actually closer to the way that it was done originally. What's happened is we've had 1,600 years where it all went weird.
Here, in our weird, market-driven West, a search for the spiritual must be a good thing. Even the monks, from our many spectral spiritualities, are finding common ground. Once a year, New Norcia's Benedictine monks spend the day taking tea and talking with the Buddhist monks of Serpentine, south of Perth. Purity and goodness abounds.
Monasticism which I've seen, which has been successful, is that which has focused on the transcendent, the positive side of religious life, not as a way of escape, but a way of enhancing the goodness in your life, the happiness in your life, the fulfillment in your life.
I think the longing for fulfillment, the longing for enlightenment is present in every human being, and it does underlie their interest in sex and drugs and other things that attract them. If you can evoke that longing in them and ask what do they really want, what are they looking for in their drugs or in their sex or whatever it is that they're into, I think most of them know what you're talking about. And most of them will say, yes, I find it to some extent in the things that I do, but not as much as I need, not as much as I want. I just make an act of faith that every human being instinctively desires truth, desires love, desires endless happiness.
We live today with economic values that have diminished the things that made the West the preeminent civilization. Democracy, limitless thought, provocative art, wild music, freedom. They say the market makes a good servant, but a bad master. Today, we question the state at every election. We've relegated the church, but we're in thrall of the market, unbridled and dominant in our lives. It's time for atonement. The West needs a new renaissance, a new enlightenment, a new spirituality to unmask this cultural fraud.
Meaning in life is kind of central to health and well-being, but it need not be religious. Today in particular, we're encouraged to find meaning in life in our personal lives, through families, through career, through sport, our own health and fitness, the achievements of our kids and so on. But spirituality, I think, offers something rather deeper. It's central to those age-old questions that we've asked ourselves. Who am I? Where have I come from? Why am I here? It's a very subtle form of meaning, and therefore easily corrupted by societies, including by religions, towards other ends, more political ends, the pursuit of power. But it's also, I think, one of the most powerful forms of meaning, and certainly the only one that transcends our personal circumstances, the social conditions in which we live, and so offers this sort of essential support during the sort of trouble and strife of mortal existence.
We believe in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, eternally...
But if you can't come at any organised religious path to meaning, then have a look behind you. To a unique land brimming with a certain spirituality.
I think what's sacred about this right here is that you are forced to live in the presence of eternity. There's so much eternity here. Not many distractions, and the landscape forces you inward, and it forces you, I think, into metaphysical speculation.
Shopping centres, suburbia, beaches. Generations of Australians will go by without ever turning their gaze inland.
Patrick White called us huddlers, huddling on the coast and refusing to go inland. But more and more there's a sense of that you don't only have to, say, go to Europe or Asia to look for the holy places, that we can feel a sense of the holy in the land that we used to just fly over on our way to London or Bangkok. And that we are, I think, more inclined these days to be sensitive toward the potentially sacredness, the sacred quality of the landscape that we have, I think, in the past taken for granted.
Unlike Australia's Indigenous people, who've been communing with this land for a very long time.
Our connection to country is very special. I mean, it's something that's born and bred within you. It's something that's connected to you through a kinship system. And that means I have got a lot of animals and plants and country that are very much connected to my moiety, or my skin name. The black cockatoo is something of mine. Black goannas that run around the country here, or the wallaby, which is part of mine. And so when we see that animal moving around, we believe that's ourselves there.
While I'm not saying that we must fully acquaint ourselves with this complex and archaic culture, there's something worth feeling out here. And after 28 years of living in urban Australia, I'm only just beginning to appreciate being out in the never-never.
I think that spirituality is about feeling connected, and the epidemic of meaninglessness which we are suffering from is about being disconnected. I think that spirituality is an antidote to alienation. It's where you suddenly feel as if you are connected to the broader cosmos.
Seeking connection is our choice, but do we realize it? It's not that we live in a society devoid of virtue. Many people live well, decently, even honourably. There are families, schools, churches, and neighbourhoods that work. There are places where virtue is taught and learned, but there is a lot less of this than there ought to be, and we know it. Australia needs to reclaim a spirituality to halt our gathering acedia, because we all need something greater than us to look up to and worship. To recalibrate our moral compass and to enjoy a rich and virtuous life now, we must touch the divine on earth, to offer our souls a better hereafter. Because if this is as good as it gets in the West, well then, we're destined to drown in this abundance of nothing and become the final chapter in this good book of our modern life.